Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight we return to the haunted veins of Arizona, a land scorched by sun, shaped by violence and haunted by what time refused to bury. These are not urban legends or campfire stories meant to scare children. They are documented accounts of horror, gathered from forgotten mining towns, abandoned highways, and deserts that still echo with voices long since dead. Every story you'll hear tonight was built from verified local reports, eyewitness statements, and archived police and medical records, fragments of truth pieced together from those who witnessed the impossible. From the cursed caverns of Two Guns, to the endless tunnels beneath Bisbee, from the ghostly highways where lost travelers still wave for help, to the silent rooms of motels that shouldn't exist anymore. Each file reveals a new corner of darkness hiding beneath the Arizona sun. These cases were compiled after years of investigation, sleepless nights, and countless interviews with people who still wake up shaking from what they saw. Names and minor details have been changed to protect the living, but every terrifying truth remains exactly as it was found. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Shadow Whisper, where we bring you real horror from real people every single night. So lock your doors, keep your lights low, and listen carefully, because in the Arizona desert, some whispers never die. I tried not to listen anymore. For weeks I drove in silence, no music, no radio, just road noise and memory. But that kind of silence isn't safe. It gives things room to find you. One night, south of Bisbee, the radio turned on by itself. The dial rolled to 1370 AM and Marlene's voice came through clear as daylight. "Good evening, neighbors. This is Tombstone Radio, keeping you company through the long desert night. We've got a few quick notes before we sign off." Her tone was calm, casual. "Road hazard warning. A southbound truck with a white cab and missing side mirror is approaching mile 271. Driver, please slow down. You're being followed too closely." My heart stopped. That was me. A second voice, male, anxious, broke through the static. "Plates red hot, Marley. If you keep feeding it power, we'll blow the line." "Just one more warning, Harold," she said softly. "He's almost there." The signal grew louder until it filled the cab, vibrating through the steering wheel. The mirrors flickered with static light, reflecting desert that didn't exist. Then she spoke again, quieter now. "Nathan, eyes forward. Don't look back." Out of reflex, I checked the side mirror anyway. Something was pacing my truck. A second set of headlights moving perfectly in sync with mine, though no engine sound followed. When I blinked, they vanished, swallowed by the night. The signal snapped to silence. A few miles ahead, I saw flashing red lights and brake dust in the air. A pickup had spun out on the shoulder, the exact spot Marlene had warned about. The driver was shaken but alive. When the deputy waved me past, I asked if they'd sent any alert. He shook his head. "No broadcast tonight, sir. You just got lucky." The next morning, I parked outside a diner in Tombstone. On the corkboard near the counter, pinned under yellowing paper, was a laminated obituary. Marlene Bell, 1932-1958. Forever remembered as the voice that stayed until everyone got home. That line broke something in me. I left a note beside it, folded into the edge of the frame. "Thank you for still being here." That night I drove the same route one last time. The air was still, moonlight soft on the asphalt. At 1:37 AM, faint and far away, I heard her again, no static this time, just that calm, steady voice drifting through the speakers. "This is KTRM Tombstone Radio signing off. Until the next traveler finds us." I turned the dial. It wouldn't move. When I looked at the clock on the dash, the time had frozen at 2:10 AM, the same minute the transmitter burned down, 67 years ago. Some frequencies never fade. Some voices refuse to let the desert forget their purpose. If you ever drive through Cochise County and your radio hums to life, listen closely, because it might not be static. It might be a voice still reading the road watch for the living. The station burned down in 1958, but the broadcast never ended. I became obsessed. I bought an old signal finder from a ham operator in Sierra Vista and mounted it on my truck dash. If KTRM was real, I could triangulate where it came from. The readings pulled me toward Charleston Wash, a dry, cracked stretch of desert a few miles north of town. There was nothing there but scrub, fence posts, and the bones of a cinder block shed half buried in sand. I climbed through the collapsed doorway and found what looked like a burned transmitter. Metal ribs melted together, coils fused green from heat. The smell of old ash still clung to the walls even though the fire had burned out decades ago. A single clock hung on the wall, its hands frozen at 2:10 a.m. When I turned on my handheld radio, the static vanished and her voice filled the air, louder than ever. "This is Marlene Bell, bringing you your late-night road watch. We're keeping an eye on Charleston Road near Escalante Wash. We're told the water's rising fast. So if you're listening out there, don't argue with the river." The ground trembled under me. I stepped outside just in time to see a flash flood rushing through the wash below, churning through the sand like liquid glass. The storm had come out of nowhere. Not a drop of rain where I stood, but down there the world was drowning. Her voice didn't stop. "And for our night drivers, keep your mirrors clean and your eyes forward. The desert has a way of showing you what you're not supposed to see." Her tone shifted, softer now, almost personal. "Isn't that right, Nathan?" I froze. She'd said my name. I tore the batteries out of the radio and threw it into the sand. For a moment, silence returned until I realized the sound wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from inside the shed, echoing faintly, as if the building itself remembered how to broadcast. I ran back to my truck and drove until the sun broke over the horizon. When I looked in the mirror, the static light of the radio tower shimmered one last time in the distance. Except there was no tower. Just heat rising off the desert like ghosts learning how to speak again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I searched online archives, called local historians, and even drove back to the Tombstone Historical Museum. The curator, an old man named Dwyer, told me something I'll never forget. That station used to read road watches at night, flood warnings, fire alerts, all that. People swore Marlene saved lives. But after that fire, some folks kept hearing her voice on their car radios for months. Said she was still doing her job. One trucker even claimed she warned him of a crash that hadn't happened yet. The next morning it did. He paused. They called her the voice that wouldn't sign off. My name is Nathan Hale, and I've driven the Tucson to Douglas corridor for nearly 2 decades. Most nights it's just me. The hum of diesel and the kind of silence that crawls through the desert like a living thing. Out here the world feels hollow after midnight. No headlights, no towns, no reason for the road to exist except to take you somewhere lonelier. It started about a year ago, sometime in October. I was west of Tombstone, maybe 40 miles from Bisbee, when the radio dial jumped on its own. One second I had country music playing. The next, static filled the cab, followed by a woman's voice. Soft, cheerful, and impossibly clear. "Good morning, Cochise County. You're tuned to KTRM Tombstone Radio, bringing you the latest from across the county." Her tone had that 1950s brightness, like the kind of voice that would announce pie sales or church bazaars. It was out of place, too crisp for AM radio, too warm for the desert night. Then she said something that made me turn down the volume. "Motorists are advised to avoid Charleston Road at Escalante Wash. Reports of a semi-truck accident blocking both lanes." I looked at the clock. It was 1:37 a.m. I wasn't anywhere near Charleston, but the warning stuck with me. 10 minutes later, a convoy of flashing lights appeared on the horizon. Sheriff trucks, ambulances, even a tow. I slowed down, curious. When I asked a deputy what had happened, he told me a cattle hauler had jackknifed near Charleston Road. I checked my dash clock again. The crash must have happened moments before that broadcast. I laughed it off. Coincidence, I told myself. Maybe the broadcast was delayed, or maybe the woman was a dispatcher's voice bleeding through. But a week later it happened again. Same time. Same cheerful woman. Tombstone Radio here. We've got strong winds tonight. Visibility low near Highway 90 by Huachuca City. Please avoid the area. A sedan spun off the shoulder. And sure enough, as I crested the hill 10 minutes later, I saw fresh skid marks in the sand. The same kind of car she'd mentioned, its driver on the phone under the emergency lights. By the third night, I was hooked. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every warning, every name she mentioned, every exact minute. I wanted to find the source. Maybe a pirate station or old ham relay catching frequencies from decades ago. Except for one problem. When I checked the FCC records, KTRM, Tombstone hadn't existed since 1958. Its tower had burned down in a transmitter fire that killed the engineer and hospitalized its only announcer, Marlene Bell. The article showed her picture. A young woman with short dark curls, standing beside a microphone and smiling with her eyes like she knew you. The caption read, "Tombstone's voice of the desert, off air after fatal transmitter fire, 1958, but she was still broadcasting, and every night I drove, her station warned me of accidents before they happened." My name is Colin Hart, and for 12 years I investigated fire scenes for an insurance carrier that believes everything has a cause if you're patient enough to find the first mistake. I've read char like sheet music, V patterns pointing to origin, alligatoring on lumber, crazing on glazing, puddles of melted aluminum that confess to temperature in the language of metal. Most blazes lie if you let the crowd tell the story first. The room never does. A wall will tell you exactly where heat bent time. Jerome, Arizona didn't want my kind of certainty. The town crouches on Cleopatra Hill like it's afraid to slide. Switchbacks climbing past brick hotels that remember copper money and funerals in the same breath. People come for the view and the ghosts. The volunteer fire patches sewn into denim jackets that were new in the 1980s and never will be again. I'd been hired off the books, cash in an envelope, by a boutique that lost a storage unit to a mystery ember. 2 blocks from a house people claimed burned every night and didn't leave a mark by morning. Locals call it House 7. Though there isn't a street number left, a milled stone foundation holds up nothing but air. The boards that were once a floor are gone. So are the joists, the roof, the lives that used to fit between them. What stands as a perimeter of basalt rock with hand-cut corners and a single threshold. 2 worn stones offset a palm's width, just enough to catch a boot if you aren't looking. Across the gap, a black locust has grown where a parlor might have been and litters the ground with hard pods like spent shells. They say the fire starts just after 12:03 a.m. No wind required. No fuel either. Not in the way a textbook would recognize it. Folks swear it blooms the way a memory does. Fully formed, patient, unpersuaded by rain. When the sun comes up, there's dew where flames should have eaten. And tourists take photos of empty air. I set up on the switchback above it at 10:40 p.m. A tripod, a borrowed FLIR with a fresh SD card, and a notebook that already smelled like creosote because I'd left it on too many tailgates. The hillside below held a pattern of foundations like old teeth. From where I stood, I could see the slow pulse of town, the grill at the hotel closing, the night clerk smoking, a cat performing the sacred ritual of pretending to be feral. At 11:21, a woman in a red beanie walked past House 7 carrying a grocery sack as if it were a lantern. She never looked in, which told me she knew better. At 11:58, the wind turned and brought up the valley the scent nobody mistakes, cold ash that isn't from today. The FLIR aimed downrange showed nothing but the chalk of stone and the black of the gap where floor used to be. 1. The hillside emptied. No cars, no footfall. I logged ambient at 41 degrees, RH at 29%. A light northerly you could lose under the sound of your own coat. 3. The lower left of the rectangle warmed 3 degrees on the fly-hour like a blush. No visible flame. Just temperature rising in a tidy triangle against nothing. A moment later, the top right brightened. Not conduction. There's nothing to conduct through. A cross-draft shouldn't produce that, not without a duct or a door to pull breath. I looked down with my eyes instead of the screen. The air trembled inside the foundation as if a stove had been lit, and the glass of the world were expanding. Then the first visible flame manifested at waist height, not licking up from soil but hanging in space where a wall once stood, oxygen feeding it as though plaster were there to lean against. It found a stud that no longer exists and ran the line to the ceiling as if muscle memory lived in heat. By 12:04, the shape of the room was drawn in fire. Window here, mantel there, doorway yawning, a runner catching along a path no carpet had touched in a century. Someone coughed. The sound carried like it had a hallway to travel down. I wrote adult male, dry, second bark out of habit and felt stupid as I underlined it. The FLIR showed a form in the upper left corner. So white-hot the algorithm salted out details, but the numbers said 96 degree, human heat, not flame. No body to hold it. Just a heat signature shaped like a person who didn't know which way a door opens. Hello? I heard myself say out loud to no one and to a room that had been disassembled before my father was born. At 12:06, a second voice higher, maybe a woman, maybe just younger air shaped by fear, said, "He locked it." The consonants fell down the hill and broke at my boots. I went down without choosing to. My feet knew how to get there. This switchback, this cut-through scrub, this stone at the edge that always tilts left. And I was at the lip of the foundation looking into a fire that didn't throw heat where it should. I could feel it, warm, then hot, then something beyond when I leaned over the threshold stone. But one step back at my shoulders and the night was cold again. Like two climates had struck a treaty at a line only the house remembered. The smell wasn't right. It wasn't varnish and sap and kitchen fat. It was wool and citrus soap and the faint mineral of old kitchen tile cooking underneath. The flames traced the path of a staircase that isn't there. Footfalls I couldn't see going up and up to nowhere. Who locked it? I asked, and the idiocy of talking to the empty settled into my mouth like a coin. From the street above, someone called a name that wasn't mine. A porch light found me and swaggered in the cold. I stepped back from the threshold because the part of me that reads lost like a job description had begun to rehearse the sentence. I slipped. At 12:09, flame reached the phantom roof line. The mantel brightened in a rectangle like a photograph catching, the size and shape you'd hang behind the sofa if you still loved the person in it. A cat yowled once, feline vowels carry whether the cat exists or not. And then so quickly my notes looked like I was lying later. 12:12 found the room gone. No smoke, no afterglow, no ember winking out. Just stone shining with dew where heat had been, and the smell of wet wool like somebody just pulled laundry off a line ahead of rain. The FLIR showed ambient again. The SD card's time code marched on like it didn't care. From the porch above, the woman in the beanie called down. "You knew?" "I'm visiting," I said. She nodded like we'd concluded something. "You don't go over the stones," she said. "If you do, you gotta do it again tomorrow. Only gets worse." She went inside and turned her porch light off. The hill remembered how to be quiet. I wrote House 7 performs nightly 12:03, 12:12, then scratched performs and replaced it with Burns, then scratched that too. Nothing we name it makes it make more sense. I closed the FLIR case with hands that smelled like smoke that didn't exist. Behind me, somewhere farther up the hill, a siren yawned and gave up. Jerome sleeps light. The hillside does not. Heat took the inside of my mouth first. The way a breath from a hot oven finds your tongue. The threshold stones hummed through my boots. Not vibration exactly, more like the idea of vibration the body translates into alarm. The room drew itself around me with fire that didn't make smoke. The mantel flamed. The staircase lifted out of temperature where no wood stood. A hallway to my right insisted by light alone that it had a door at the end. I could have retreated. That's the thing my report would later leave out. I could have stepped back onto the switchback and let the night keep its terms. Instead, I went 2 paces in and found the world go thin like old paper. My FLIR screen populated with bodies. Not figures, not faces, just human heat shaped like decisions. One by the mantel, one at the foot of the stair, one smaller, sitting where a person would sit if they'd been told to wait and had run out of ways to defy the order. Which way? I said to heat the camera couldn't make a life from. A woman's voice answered from upstairs, a rasp that had practiced the sentence until it could say it without wasting air. He locked it. He locks them when he drinks. Floorboards that weren't there popped in a cadence that convinced my balance they existed. The knob in my pocket, the one I'd stolen against the town's better. Judgment grew cold against my thigh. I drew it out. It lay in my palm like a coin you wish hadn't been minted. The porcelain inset caught light that wasn't there, and offered it back as kitchen morning white. I turned it without a spindle and heard clearly a latch retract in a door that had no anatomy. "Can you open it now?" the downstairs voice asked, so practical, so tired. I moved toward the hall. The heat along that light-drawn corridor was lower than the rest. A draft that wasn't a draft. A negative pressure that felt like waiting. Halfway down, I got the smell right. Carbolic, the old disinfectant they used to wipe down hands that would never be clean in other ways. Not ignorance, ritual. The door at the end exists only where your body insists it does. I put my hand where a knob would be and my fingers closed around air that had learned to be round. I slotted the brass knob I was holding into nothing. It fit, not physically. That's not how any of this works. It fit the way a word does when you finally remember it in the middle of the night. Behind me, the room climbed toward its own ceiling, fire drawing joists that had long since become verbs instead of nouns. Someone coughed, a sound full of the kind of apology you make to a stranger when the street is narrow and your day is heavy. "Push," Ruth said from outside the foundation, her voice flat like she was pressing it through the slats of a confessional. "Don't pull. The locks are on the outside," I pressed. Nothing moved because nothing is what I was touching, and still I pressed again with the part of the arm that never knows it's tired until it drops the bag of dog food on your foot. In my ear, heat roared, and in my hand, cold sat, and in my chest something like anger finally remembered it had hands. The sound the latch made was not wood and not metal and not even time. It was a release that ran down the corridor like a child who forgot why they were keeping quiet. Behind me, the stair unsettled like it had learned to be air overnight and wasn't sure it liked the curriculum. One of the heat bodies on the FLIR moved, a smear resolving into a standing person where a sitting one had been. "I told you," the upstairs voice said in a tone that was not gratitude and wasn't on anything either. It was forward. A new word after three that had been repeated until they had grooves. The door swung into a space where there was nowhere for it to go. A wind came through that felt like outside poured through a straw. The heat's pitch changed. The room's drawing faltered like a hand getting tired. I stepped backward on instinct. The threshold rose against my heel like a friend you forget until you need a place to sit. "Back," Ruth said. Back now," I went. The flames collapsed without smoke, colors unsaid, structure unimagined. The cat yelled once from the corner where a cat would if a house remembered to have one. A child laughed like a cough trying to be brave and then cut the sound off because you're not supposed to be happy, while other people are burning. 12 arrived. The room emptied. Dew stitched itself onto stone where heat had signed its name a minute earlier. I was on my knees outside the rectangle. The brass knob still in my hand and a half-moon burnt into my palm that looked like a bite from a thing that eats time. Ruth put her hand on my shoulder like you touch a dog that has remembered thunder. "You don't bring that home," she said and nodded at the knob. "It comes back either way. But if you carry it out, it'll visit your stove at 12:03 and ask to talk." I set the knob on the threshold. The porcelain insert pointed toward the hill like an eye that's finally bored of being closed. It sat where I left it, which is not something that object had promised to do before. In the morning, I walked up to the Historical Society with a donut box under my arm and asked Lorraine if there was a name for the girl who jumped and got Away. She squinted through 80 years of other people's record-keeping and found a church roll with a scribble across the M's that could have been May or the last time someone meant to write merch and decided against it halfway through. She tapped the page with a nail she had filed into a weapon once and forgot to change back. "We don't get names we deserve," she said. "Just the ones that fit in margins." On my way down, House 7 looked like a rectangle built for teaching geometry and grief. In the center of the foundation, where heat had sketched the stair 2 nights running, sat a blackened padlock with its shackle sprung. New to me, not to the hill. I didn't pick it up. You learn where ownership ends. That night I didn't bring equipment. Ruth met me anyway with her beanie and a thermos that smelled like cinnamon and a warning. "It's not fixed," she said. "Nothing is. If the house doesn't burn one night, don't clap." "It's just thinking," the 3 came. The lower left warmed like it had done for someone who needed to believe cold had rules, and the upper right answered. And the mantle remembered how to be proud. But the hallway to the back door did a new thing. It stayed dark, a slender absence in a room defined by flame. If you didn't know the show, you'd miss it. If you did, you'd put your hand on your mouth and fail to keep still. "Someone found a way out," Ruth said, not smiling exactly. "Maybe just one. Maybe that's all any place gets per century. I don't write poetry in reports. I don't tell clients the fire is older than their deductible and smarter than their contractor. I wrote origin unknown, and no evidence of human involvement in spontaneous recurrence consistent across witness decades." Then I closed my book and stood with a woman who refuses to let strangers be alone, while the hill redraws its loss in light. The next morning I did the thing that makes locals tolerate you. I bought coffee from the first place that opened, didn't talk like a detective, tipped like a sinner, and listened. If a town has a folklore, the barista knows the abridged edition. "House 7, she said, sliding a paper cup that could scald a bishop. "Used to be a boarding house. Turn of the century. Fire took one side of the hill 3 times in 97, 99, 15. My granddad liked the 99 one for storytelling. Said a landlord put locks on the outside of upstairs doors to stop the girls from entertaining minors on credit." She looked at me over the rim of the machine. "Or to keep them from leaving debt. Depends who you ask." "Anyone keep records?" I asked. She smirked like I'd asked where they keep the wind. "Historical Society has clippings. Volunteer fire too if you bring donuts." The Historical Society smelled like lemon oil and pessimism toward humidity. A retired teacher named Lorraine ran it with the serene cruelty of someone who has taught middle school boys about primary sources. She pulled binders like a conjurer, and I paged through brown newsprint that made my fingers look like I'd been rolling pennies. The articles repeated like a chorus. Borders, locks, girls, heat. A column from 1900 mentioned proprietor J.H. Murch padlocking, at 10 for the protection of young ladies. A cheeky editorial called him Murch the Merciful, and then spent 3 paragraphs describing how wine was better than virtue at curing colds. No one wrote the sentence I needed. He locked them in during the fire. That's how the worst things survive, without paperwork. But there was a grainy photograph of a doorway with a hasp that looked newer than the casing around it. Someone had upgraded the lock after the wood had learned the shape of a hand. At the volunteer firehouse, I left a dozen glaze that would shame a saint and asked for after-action reports from the last 10 years at the ruin. The chief, Barry, whose mustache was the kind of decision you don't reverse without a lawyer, kept nothing official in a place like that, but he had notes in spiral pads with dates and temperatures and the kind of doodles men make while waiting for lightning to change its mind. "Every time someone calls at night," he said, flipping, "we get there and there's nothing to spray. Thermal shows a spike. You step into the rectangle and your eyebrows tell you you're near a stove. You step out and you're on the porch in January. We don't even roll the engine anymore. We park and wait it out. Town policy is observe, don't die. Any injuries?" I asked. He shook his head once, the way a man does when he thinks of exactly one and won't call it that. A tourist tripped the stones last year. Broke a wrist in a story he'll keep for the rest of his life. He sent me a photo a week later. His smoke alarm at home went off every night at 12:03 until he moved it to the garage. Stopped the day he brought it back here and set it on the foundation at noon. He lifted his coffee. Some debts are local. I went back to house 7 at midday with a tape measure, a plumb bob, and my stubbornness. I mapped the rectangle to the inch. 20x28, single room front, lean-to kitchen off the rear that's now a suggestion at best. The threshold stones were offset, not by accident, an old trick to keep cold air from running like water across a floor. My plumb line found iron buried at the northeast corner where no modern plan would hide it. Likely a piece of a stove flue, rusted into the sound of the hill. In the dead center, where a parlor would have been, lay a dull brass oval the size of a hand. I brushed dirt away with the back of my knuckles. A doorknob rose, still threaded to a spindle broken short. The porcelain insert crazed fine as old skin. When I lifted it, the smell of citronella polish puffed up like someone had breathed through the wood yesterday. I turned the knob in my palm. It rotated against nothing and stopped exactly where a latch would have found a strike. I carried the knob to the bench on the switchback and stared at it like it would say a name if I loved it enough. A woman in the beanie, the same from last night, sat 2 boards down and opened a paper bag with reverence. "You found it," she said. "What is it?" I asked. "The only thing that never leaves," she said. "It shows up where it feels like it. We move it to the museum. It comes back. We throw it in the dumpster. It comes back. I put it in my freezer once. It made the ice taste like soap." She smiled without humor. "You learn to leave a thing where it sleeps." "What happened here?" I asked. She chewed and considered. "People who live with a story long enough won't gild it. They'll sand it down until it fits in a pocket. Girls lived here. Work you don't put in a paper where your mother can read it. Fire started below the stairs. That's what my Nana said. Nobody knew the way out because the way out was held shut. One of them jumped and got away. Folks called her ungrateful for stealing life when the house wanted it. People are vicious when they're tidy." The afternoon slid toward its own color. I logged orientation, front faces south-southeast. Noted a shadow line that arrives at the threshold at 4:52, and wrote a sentence I didn't like seeing in my script. "If the room is telling the story, we are the ones deciding not to listen." That night I went back with a cheap extinguisher tucked under my arm and the worst idea I've had as an adult. The beanie woman, her name is Ruth. She'll make you repeat it if you pretend you heard. Found me at the switchback and handed me a painter's P95. "It won't help," she said, "but you'll feel like it did. Do you watch it every night?" I asked. "Not if I want to sleep," she said. "But when it chooses a new person, I try not to let them be alone." "Am I chosen?" I asked. I heard how it sounded and hated it. Ruth pulled her hat lower and grimaced at the horizon. "No one ever says yes," she said. "They just come back anyway." 3 approached. My FLIR blinked awake and mapped the invisible walls of a house the hill refuses to forget. The air inside warmed in lines a carpenter would understand. I stood with my toes to the threshold and felt the tilt carry through the soles of my boots like a man reaching into his pocket for a key he shouldn't have. "Don't step over," Ruth said. Quiet as the rules of a church, I stepped over. Back at headquarters, the logs showed nothing. My route data ended 10 miles short of Casa Verde as if I'd never driven in. The usage anomaly, however, pulsed again at 02:00 a.m. Exact same load curve, same coordinates. The next evening I packed a portable analyzer and went back. From the highway, the desert lay in normal darkness. Until 1.8 miles past the mile marker, when the light rose over the scrub like a false dawn. Casa Verde shining exactly as before, but this time the streets were empty. Every bulb still burned, every neon sign still humming, but the town felt hollow, like the crowd had stepped behind a curtain. At the hardware store, the door stood open. Bell motionless. No sound except current flowing through filaments. Inside, counter sat clean, cups half full of melted ice. Newspapers dated June 8, 1957. I called out. No echo. At the center of the square stood a street light taller than the rest, base encased in green ceramic tile. A plaque at its foot, Casa Verde Central Feed, dedicated to those who kept the lights on. I opened the panel. Instead of breakers, it held rows of glass vials glowing soft white. Inside each floated a filament that bent and twitched like a heartbeat. The analyzer beeped nonsense, voltage stable, amperage negative, power flowing into absence. I pulled one vial. The instant it cleared its socket, the light around me sagged, a collective sigh from 1,000 bulbs. Inside the vial, a filament flickered and dimmed but didn't die. It formed the outline of a face for less than a breath. Female, eyes closed. Then it folded into ash and vanished. When the town's brightness returned, a single bulb across the street popped. Tiny crack, then smoke. I looked up to see every porch light flicker in sympathy, like a crowd bowing at once. A whisper threaded through the hum. Not words at first, just cadence. Then syllables shaping themselves out of vibration. Keep them on. I left the vial where it fell and ran to my truck. The radio, off moments ago, spat static. Then a voice. Power outage recorded June 8, 1957. All residents presumed lost in electrical fire. The voice sounded archival, a man reading from an old emergency tape. But the date, the same on the newspapers, snapped cold through me. When I glanced back at the square, figures had reappeared. White silhouettes standing perfectly still beneath the lamps, each looking straight up into the light as if waiting for command. I didn't wait for one. I drove until the desert went black again, headlights finally mattering. The hum falling behind like a memory turning down its own volume. My name is Ellie Graves. I drive the service routes for Southwest Utilities. Miles of copper line and silence stretching from Florence up toward the Superstition Mountains. Every Thursday I log meter faults and heat-related shorts along Route 79. Every Thursday at dusk, one particular detour flickers in the corner of my eye, a spur road marked Casa Verde Exit 2MI. The map app never shows it. Neither does our grid overlay. Last spring, the outage board flagged a phantom draw near that coordinate. Steady amperage, no account attached, humming like an air conditioner that never rests. I drove out to see which rancher forgot to pay. After the first mile, pavement turned pale and glassy, the way asphalt gets when it remembers rain. Sagebrush glowed sodium orange, though there were no poles in sight. And then, without crest or curve, the town appeared. A bowl of warm light laid flat against the desert like someone had poured it there. Every house burned bright. Street lamps, porch bulbs, fluorescents under eaves, no shadows anywhere. I pulled over beside a sign that read, "Welcome to Casa Verde, founded 1927. We never sleep." The letters buzzed faintly, insects trapped in glass. At 8 p.m. exactly, the sidewalks filled. Not traffic, people. Every face bleached under halogen, pupils pin-thin, smiles too careful. They walked slow circles around the square as if waiting for a cue. The heat off the lights pressed my skin like a migraine. I killed my engine and stepped out. The hum was total. You don't notice real silence until it's replaced by one single note from 1,000 filaments vibrating in unison. A man in coveralls waved from the hardware store doorway. "You from the power company?" I nodded, badge half raised. He grinned, relief widening the cracks in his lips. "Good. Bulb's been dying faster lately." Inside, every shelf shimmered. Rows of 100-watt incandescents, old stock nobody sells anymore. Each bulb carried the same hand-stamped code, CV57. "How long you folks been running this many?" I asked. He shrugged. "Since before me. Lights keep the dark out. That's the rule. Town ordinance? Older than that." When I stepped back onto the street, the sun was gone, but the town hadn't noticed. Not one fixture dimmed. The sky above looked bruised, but the horizon never reached true night. A child rode past on a tricycle, blinking red-blue LEDs that matched the rhythm of the street lamps perfectly, as if synchronized. I drove 3 laps around the square searching for a substation. None. Yet the amperage on my handheld meter held steady. 90 kilowatts continuous draw from nowhere. At the north end, an alley narrowed into a glow like a throat. At its end stood a white 2-story house brighter than daylight. Every window bare, every bulb exposed, ceiling fans spinning with no blades visible through the glare. On the front lawn, a wooden sign leaned crooked, in memory of the night of '57. No explanation. Just that. When I turned to leave, my truck's shadow wasn't where it should have been. It stretched toward the house instead of away, long and trembling like it wanted in. For a week I told no one. Work kept assigning me southern routes far from Casa Verde, as if the dispatch board knew what not to mention. Yet each night at 2 a.m., my house lights brightened on their own. Bulbs I hadn't touched since moving in, flickering once, twice, steady. On the 5th night, my breaker tripped. Everything went dark except the hallway, where one bulb refused to die. In its glass I saw movement, the faint shimmer of that same woman's face, eyes open this time. She mouthed 2 words I couldn't hear. Then the filament burst and the darkness rushed in like a tide. I drove back. Route 79 was deserted except for coyotes trotting shoulder to shoulder, staring toward where the light should be. But the horizon stayed black. Casa Verde was gone. I parked at the mile marker, stepped into the brush, and found only burned glass scattered across the sand. Underneath the ashes, wires ran like veins, still warm. My analyzer pulsed once, then died. Battery drained in seconds. Far off, a single glow lingered, an old streetlight pole, half melted, leaning like a cross. At its base, another plaque half buried, for those who refuse the darkness. The ceramic tiles around it were cracked open, and inside the housing sat dozens of small white vials, empty now. No filaments, no light, only a thin layer of soot shaped like fingerprints pressed from the inside out. The wind carried a low electric hiss, fading east. When I turned, the desert behind me shimmered with pinpoints. Hundreds of bulbs scattered through the scrub, still glowing faintly, as if the town had dispersed itself one light at a time into the land. Back home, I pulled the utility records one more time. June 8, 1957, transformer surge ignites Casa Verde substation. All 57 residents perish. The after-action photo showed exactly the town I'd walked, frozen mid-blaze, bulbs still burning in ruin. The caption read, "Power could not be cut until lines melted." That night, as I filed the report, my desk lamp flickered once. The bulb inside wasn't mine. It bore a faint hand-stamped code on the base, CV57. I unscrewed it carefully, wrapped it in foil, and drove 20 miles west until the desert was darker than thought itself. I buried it there. When I turned to go, the sky behind me lit for a heartbeat, as if something under the sand had smiled. My name is Aaron Price. I haul frozen produce from Phoenix to El Paso twice a week. Same stretch of desert, same radio chatter. I could drive I-10 in my sleep, and maybe that's the problem. 2 months ago, somewhere east of Tucson, my fuel gauge slid to empty even though I'd filled up 20 miles earlier. The low fuel chime hit like a heart monitor in a flat line. The nearest exit read mile 46, services 12 MI. I'd never noticed it before. The off-ramp curved down into a shallow basin. At the bottom sat a single gas station. Concrete island swallowed by night. The sign still rotated. Highway, gas and diner. Open 24 hours. Everything about it looked 40 years out of date. Metal pump handles. Glass display fridge with green Coca-Cola script. Payphone bolted to the wall. A yellow glow leaked from inside, steady as a heartbeat. I coasted in, killed the engine, and stepped out into silence so dense it pushed back. A bell above the door chimed when I entered. The air smelled of diesel and lemon cleaner. Behind the counter sat an older man in a brown attendant's shirt, reading a newspaper that looked freshly ironed. "Evening," he said without looking up. "Pump or booth?" "Pump," I said. "Regular," he nodded. 12 gallons even," I frowned. "How'd you know?" "Just did." The register clacked open by itself, already holding the right bills. When I stepped back outside, pump 2 was running. Nozzle locked in place, though I hadn't touched it. The digits on the dial stopped exactly at 12.0 gal. I reached to remove the handle. Warm. Not from fuel friction, but body heat. That's when I noticed something impossible. The price window was in dollars. It scrolled. June 9th, 1959, 0123. AM. I blinked hard, rubbed at the glass, still there. Rolling numbers like a clock. The air shifted. Music seeped from the diner speakers. Patsy Cline. Walkin' After Midnight. I should have left right then. But curiosity kills slower than gas fumes. Inside, a woman in a waitress uniform leaned against the counter. Red lipstick perfect. No cell phone, no receipts, just a coffee pot that never emptied. "Coffee?" she asked. "No thanks." She smiled politely. "Suit yourself. You're early tonight." "I've never been here before." She tilted her head, confused. "Sure you have. You all have." A neon clock above the pie case froze at 1:24 and began to hum. Every light in the diner pulsed once like a heartbeat and then steadied. The waitress whispered, "Right on time," and turned toward the window. Outside, the horizon caught fire. Not orange, not real flame, just a flash so white it erased shadow. A sound followed, deep and heavy, like someone dragging iron through sand. The attendant looked up from his paper and said almost kindly, "You'll want to fill up quick. It happens every night." I ran outside. The desert beyond the station glowed in a ring, a perfect circle of light miles wide, burning with no smoke. I could see outlines moving inside it. Trucks, cars, silhouettes of people walking as if in slow motion. Their shapes stretched tall and thin, light passing through them like water through glass. I shouted, "What is that?" The attendant stepped out, calm as weather. "After image," he said. "What's left when time loops back to check its work." He pulled a pack of Luckies from his pocket, lit one off the fluorescent hum, and continued. "Big wreck. Tanker exploded here, 59. Fuel line split, lit the desert. 36 cars stacked before anyone knew. They rebuilt the highway higher. But the fire doesn't know it stopped." "You're saying this happens every night?" "Every night, 1:23 to 1:31. Folks pass through, think it's heat lightning. We just keep the lights on so it knows where to stop." The words sank like sand and oil. "Who's we?" He pointed at the diner. Through the glass I saw figures in identical uniforms. Seated in booths, unmoving, grayed out, faintly transparent. Each lit from within like the tubes of an old sign. "Crew that didn't make it out," he said. "They keep the pumps running. You keep the story alive. Fair trade." I tried to back away, but my boots felt glued to the concrete. The ring of light contracted, moving closer, humming louder. The digits on the pump rolled backward. 12.0, 11.9, 11.8. Fuel siphoning back into the nozzle. Static filled my ears, thick and human. Words formed, "Stay lit." I dove for the truck, turned the key. The engine coughed, refused. The dash clock flicked to 1:29 a.m. The ring of light kissed the edge of the lot, bleaching the pumps white. I saw faces in the glare, dozens, their mouths open but silent. The attendant raised a hand, not to stop me, but in farewell. "Next time you're low," he called, "you'll know where to find us." Then the light went out. Darkness crashed down so hard it made noise. A vacuum slap. My truck engine roared to life. The gauges reset, fuel full. When I looked back, the station was gone. Just desert. No sign, no building, not even tire tracks. I drove until sunrise, hands locked on the wheel, convinced if I slowed down the dashboard would glow 1:23 again. Morning found me at a truck stop outside Lordsburg. I told the mechanic I'd refueled at Highway Gas and Diner Mile 46. He stared like I'd spoken a curse. Mile 46 has been dirt since Eisenhower, he said. Never had services. Closest fuel's 39 or 52. I laughed, too dry to be funny. Then where'd this come from? I handed him the receipt I'd found wedged under my wiper. Yellow paper, grease smudged. Total line reading 372, 12 gal reg, June 9, 1959, 1:23 a.m. He ran a thumb over the ink. It smeared like it had been printed seconds ago. That night in my cab, I unfolded the map. The exit still wasn't there. But my GPS pinged, unprompted, drawing a thin gray line south through nothing. At its end blinked a dot labeled Highway Gas, unverified. The onboard radio crackled. A familiar voice. Regular or premium tonight, driver? My breath stalled. Who is this? Same as before. 12 gallons even. I ripped the headset out. The truck lights flickered. Once, twice, steady. The clock read 1:23 a.m. Outside the windshield, the desert horizon flared white. I floored the accelerator. The truck leapt forward, gears screaming. The light chased, fast, silent, filling mirrors, filling me. Then nothing. When I blinked, I was back on the highway proper, dawn breaking, fuel gauge steady at half. My odometer had rolled 12 miles backward. At the next way station, the officer asked for papers. I handed over my logbook. He flipped to the last page, frowned. You wrote your departure as June 9, 1959, he said. Everything okay? I nodded hollow. Just tired, he handed it back. Get some rest. You look like you drove through hell. Maybe I did. 2 weeks later, corporate mailed my fuel audit. One new entry, no signature. Highway Gas and Diner, account letter 959. Todas gal $1. 3-1, they charged it to legacy vendor reconciliation. Nobody in accounting could explain it. The receipt still sits in my glove box. Sometimes when the highway stretches too long and my lights begin to dim, I hear that faint chime, doorbell on a glass door, and smell lemon cleaner in air that should only smell like dust. I've stopped checking the clock. My name is Maya Ortiz, and I make a living teaching photography workshops along Arizona's forgotten highways. Sun-bleached signage, railroad sidings, the angle of a boarded window that still allows light 1 inch at a time. I've learned that some places want to be photographed and others just allow it. Copper Creek didn't want either. The old mining town hides north of Mammoth, tucked in a fold of the Galeros. You don't find it on the way to anywhere. You decide it owes you an afternoon and the desert decides you're wrong. The road up is a rutted apology. Granite marbles under tires and switchbacks that make your steering wheel feel like confession. I first went because a student of mine, a retired geologist named Al, swore there were hundreds of stone ruins, miners' cottages, a collapsed post office, a school that managed to lose its roof without losing its shadow. You'll love the light, he said. It has a weather. We parked by noon, heat ringing in the air like a struck coin. The town looked more printed than built. Walls stacked from pale river rock, windows empty as missing teeth, mesquite muscling through what used to be floors. The school sat a little uphill, a rectangle of stone with a doorway still square and a chalk shelf still embedded like a fossil. I framed the doorway against the ridge and took a test shot. From 25 f8 mild polarizer, the viewfinder showed clean lines. Stone, shadow, sky. When I chimped the LCD, a girl stood just inside the doorway, bare feet, calico dress, hair parted down the middle like a photograph from a courthouse wall. I lowered the camera. The doorway was empty. I've done this long enough to distrust screens before I distrust eyes. I took 3 more frames rapid. Empty doorway in the glass. Girl in the review. In the second frame, she'd turned her head. In the third, she was closer, shoulder a bloom of sun. My stomach moved an inch south. You seeing this? I asked Al. He squinted into the heat. Seeing what? In the stone room, the air smelled faintly of clay dust and old paper. The chalk shelf still held a smear of white. I touched the ridge of it with a fingertip, then wiped the chalk on my jeans because that's what you do when your hands don't know where to put their worry. We worked our way down the hill, giving the ruins our names for a map nobody would read. Cookhouse, assay shed, company store, a wall and stubborn nails. Every time I photographed a doorway or a window, children appeared in the replay. Never when my eye was on the scene, only when the camera told me what I'd already seen. 3 at first, then 5. Then I stopped counting. They weren't theatrical. The camera didn't make them monsters. They looked like school pictures from a year the printer forgot to finish. Serious mouths, hair slicked with water, Sunday clothes on a Tuesday. They were never centered, always a little aside, like they'd lined up just out of the teacher's frame. By late afternoon, the wind came up canyon, bringing the smell of wet rock from thunder you could hear but not see. We packed early. I told myself I'd sort the anomaly at home. Bad sensor, sun flare bounced off a polished stone, pareidolia. You can fit logic like a lens if you want. Back in Tucson, I loaded the files onto my workstation. The XCF was normal. Shutter speeds matched the light. White balance sat where I left it. There were no compression artifacts, no digital seams, but the children had advanced again. In the last set, the boy at the edge looked up into the lens with the blank courage kids wear when they're told to be brave. Something light-colored smudged the bridge of his nose. Chalk, I thought, or dust, or the thumbprint of a teacher who meant it kindly. I did not sleep well. When I woke at 3:11, my hallway nightlight seemed to pulse at a rate I wanted to call 60 hertz and not breathing. The living room smelled like wet wool. In my chest, my heart made the sound of a shutter tripping once and then waiting to see if anyone asked it to do it again. At 8 a.m., with coffee performing triage, I opened the last image. The children were closer again. I hadn't shot since the night before. That was when I noticed the chalk on my jeans had spelled itself by accident where my hand smudged it. A line, a crude circle, another line. Like a child who doesn't know letters yet but draws the shape of the roll call anyway. I brushed it off with the flat of my palm and the dust fell toward my shoes in a ribbon, then lay there, not interested in dispersing. I emailed the Pinal County Historical Society and asked for enrollment lists for Copper Creek School. 1910-1920. The docent on duty replied instantly, which docents do only when the topic is already open on their desk. It's odd you ask, she wrote. We were just indexing the 1914 collapse. 12 children and 1 teacher absent that day by coincidence. The roll call has chalk smears where the names stop. She attached a scan. The last visible word was present, dragged halfway across the page, chalk broken into commas of pressure. Al texted, "Back up there Saturday?" I stared at the word there until it stopped meaning a place and started meaning a promise. "Yeah," I typed, "but this time we bring flowers." I don't know why I wrote that. Sometimes your hands know the ritual before you admit you're planning one. When I set the phone down, a small fingerprint showed on the glass. Dust in a whirl too narrow to be mine. We drove up again under a sky the color of old zinc. A storm shelf sat on the far range like someone had set a book down and forgot to pick it up. I'd packed extra batteries, a second body, a tripod I trust more than most people, a roll of white carnations, and a child's slate I found at the thrift store because apparently I had decided this visit belonged to a different century. Al was quiet in the passenger seat. He'd brought a 4-gas meter from his geological days and the groundwater maps he keeps folded, like letters from a version of himself that still liked meetings. "There are adits all over," he said as we bounced the last half mile. "Holes where a man believed in ore more than his joints." He tapped the map. "Copper Creek's not just one mine. It's honeycombed." At the school ruin, the air was sober, a word my abuelo used for storms with their minds made up. I set the carnations along the chalk shelf, cut the stems with my knife and poured the last inch of my water bottle into a rusted inkwell someone had mortared into the stone a lifetime ago. It held without leaking. The absurdity calmed me. "Roll call," I said to the doorway because it felt like the kind of joke you tell at church. Ortiz present. We worked downhill behind the school where the slope breaks into tailings, fans of crushed rock like the skirts of something that fell. Al's meter chirped oxygen normal at the mouth of a collapsed adit, then pinged hydrogen sulfide trace deeper in, as if language lived underground and preferred to be quiet. The opening was a man-high wedge of shadow reinforced with timbers that had learned every way wood can lose an argument to time. I put the camera on the tripod and composed the mouth of the adit. The first frame, a curve of darkness and the suggestion of rooms beyond. The review, 3 children, dusty to the knee, shoes scuffed into the pose of impatience that means we practiced and you're late. Al peered over my shoulder. His breath hitched once, then settled into the rhythm men use when they find a bone and must pretend it's a stone. "You're seeing faces on the panel?" he asked, as if trying to help me save my grip on names. "On the sensor," I said. "They don't appear until I'm finished." He nodded like we had agreed to lie together kindly and pointed to a pile of snapped chalk just inside the adit. White sticks ground into crumbs by boots that were not ours. "Human habit," he said. "Kids snap chalk. Teachers sweep." Behind us, a small wind turned the mesquite into a whisper that sounded like counting. I took another frame. The children stepped forward, 2 boys, 1 girl. The tallest boy wore a wool vest too warm for the weather. The girl clutched a slate like a plate. The third child had his hand raised, ready to answer a question he'd been taught he ought to know. "Ask them," Al said. "What?" He shrugged. "You brought flowers. Ask them." I have no theology that fits in my camera bag, so I picked a practical tone to borrow from work. "Who's here?" I said, projecting my voice the way you do at the back of a workshop. "Say your names. I will write them down." The adit smelled of damp, not wet, but thinking about it. The 4 gas meter burped a caution that sat on my neck like a hand. I took another photo because I'm wired to document instead of blink. In the review, an answer arrived in chalk scrawled on the rock just inside the threshold. 3 careful letters that could be Ben, or B with the crossbar fallen off, or Bell unfinished because the stone refused to take the line. "Careful," Al said, and placed his hand across my chest like a seatbelt. "Listen," from somewhere below the first bend, tapping. "Not random." 4, pause. 2, pause. 1. I looked at Al. "Morse," he said softly. "B is dash 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 dot. But this is," he frowned. "It's the wrong rhythm. Like a child who learned it from ears instead of a chart." "Tell them we're here," I said before I remembered I wasn't a person who told ghosts what to do. Al crouched, put his mouth near the dark. "We're here," he said, steady as water. "We're above ground. Air's good. If you can follow my voice." He stopped. The gas meter chirped up 2 notes. Something down in the stone shifted, air pressure negotiating with emptiness. I took another frame. The children had moved. The smallest stood now in the mouth, his head inside the daylight. He was pale in that way photographs manufacture, skin like paper, hair a field sheared too close. On his sleeve, a smear of white that wasn't dust. Chalk, I thought. Or someone's hand who used chalk a lot and forgave herself for forgetting. A sound above us snapped the scene at the edges. A rock big as a suitcase came off the lip of the adit and landed 2 feet from my tripod, breaking into 3 sharp daughters. The kind of sound that converts your bones to inventory. The small boy in the frame flinched, visible even on review. When I looked up, the lip of the adit had changed shape, as if the hill had remembered a version of itself where timber meant 1 more week of wages. "We're done," Al said, voice gone hoarse. "The hill's speaking. I should have packed then." I took one last picture. The children were now closer than the depth of field liked, softened, blooming the way breath fogs glass. The smallest had his hand up again. In the next frame, I didn't take a next frame. I knew it would be touching the lens. That night in Tucson, I printed the last photo 16x24 and pinned it to my wall. When I woke at 2:14, it had curled off the pin and lay face down on the floor. On the back in chalk dust there were 13 marks made by a small blunt thing, grouped 12 in one. Roll call. And somebody who didn't answer. There's a kind of promise you make to a place when you take a picture that won't leave you alone. You promise to come back whether or not your sensible friends tell you not to. I drove up alone 2 days later. Weather had swept the ridge clean. The road after the second cattle guard looked raked by a careful hand. At the school, I set the slate on the chalk shelf and wrote "roll" in letters a child would recognize. Then held the chalk like I was 5 and my mother was insisting I write thank you notes. "Name yourselves," I said, and hated how my voice put on a teacher's coat without asking me. The chalk didn't move. The air did. The doorway caught light like a mouth catching a name. The smell of soap, cheap and citrus, bloomed and vanished, the way a memory does when it's faithful but imprecise. I placed the white carnations in a line along the threshold stone, 12 in one, without planning it. The breeze made little weather in their petals. I took a photo. In review, a girl had stepped into the doorway just enough to put her hand over the last carnation in the row. Her fingers were chapped. On her wrist, a string bracelet the color of rust. "Okay," I said. "Okay." I wrote May on the slate because a woman at the Historical Society had said the name could be May, and the shape felt right under my hand. I set the slate in the sill where a window used to approve of the view. "If I'm wrong," I said to the room built mostly of air, "you can fix it." A shadow moved across the wall, a boy with a hat that might have been his father's until it wasn't. Something clicked, as if a latch somewhere decided to remember how. The chalk rolled 2 inches on the shelf and stopped like a child who enjoys following rules, but remembers what disobedience tastes like. Downhill, the audit waited with the patience of rock, which is only pretending to be patient, really. It's just engaged in a longer argument. I brought tape flags and a can of orange marking paint. Not because I wanted to be the kind of person who writes his name on stone, but because I know what getting lost feels like and like to keep it as a metaphor. At the mouth, I said what I hadn't said before. "I can't go far," I told the dark. "The air's wrong and I'm not brave." The meter beeped as if to applaud the honesty. I set the camera on the tripod in the same dents the legs had left last time and took one frame then another. In review, the children stood arrayed just within, as if against a chalk line you draw to line up for recess. The smallest boy held the slate I'd left at the school, though I had not brought it here. On it, the letters BN in a hand that had learned A and C and was pleased to show it had not forgotten. The tapping started again. 4, pause, 2, pause, 1. I tapped back with the end of my tripod. 1 for A, 2 for B, 3 for C. Like we were inventing a code too kind for survival. The gas meter yelped. Air thinned. From behind the first bend came a sigh that could have been rock exhaling or small lungs trying hard not to cough. Because the teacher said, "Stay still, the boys are digging." I backed away because fear and breath are related and you cannot have one without the other. In the viewfinder, the children advanced a step. The smallest held the slate high, letters now BEN, and the margin scuffed where a thumb had dogged the chalk line impatiently. Al says I'm good at leaving before the thing that hurts happens. He's right about photography and wrong about me. I stepped over the threshold stone, into the rectangle where heat had once written and chalk had once broken and the air writes itself around your choices. "Ben," I said into the adit softly like the lesson was memorization and not rescue. "Ben." Again, as if repetition were a rope, something moved in the dark that wasn't a body and wasn't a rumor. The sound of gravel grinding came toward me. Small increments, resolve measured by inches. I took a photo because hands do their work even when the chest wants a different job. In review, the smallest boy stood at the threshold. The others were turned inward now, faces angled down the tunnel as if to listen for instruction. "Can you step out?" I asked. The wind changed its mind and pushed cool into the frame. The boy's mouth in the image made a small crooked shape that could be please or push or P, learning to be a letter. I reached into the darkness with the slate hand that wasn't holding a slate. and touched air that felt denser than air should. The chalk I hadn't brought snapped between my fingers like a wishbone. On the stone beside the doorpost, a mark appeared, one straight line and then another across it. Tally, count by ones. Keep track. Roll call, I whispered, and began to name the numbers because I didn't have the names. 1, 2, 3. At 12, a voice like paper rubbed by hands said present, and at 13, no voice came, and the wind leaned out of the tunnel like a breath leaving. Behind me, something clicked. I turned. The school doorway across the slope, the rectangle I'd used as a frame for the sky, held a shadow I recognized now as a woman. Not tall, hairpin too heavy for the weather, hand on the jamb like she could keep the room still by standing just so. She lifted her other hand in that teacher's gesture of thank you that doesn't require gratitude to be complete. The added answered with the sound stone makes when it abandons a shape. A beam groaned, withdrew its favor from gravity and settled at a new angle that said nobody uses this door anymore. The gas meter went silent, which is the only noise it makes when you should leave. I stepped back across the stone and the rectangle cooled. In the final photo, printed large and pinned hard to make it behave, the children are fewer. 11 now in the mouth, the boy with the slate absent from the lineup. In the lower right of the frame, where the ground is only dust and shadow, a small footprint prints itself lightly in the sun. I drove down in that after-storm light that makes the desert look like it borrowed polish from an ocean. At home, I set the slate on my bookshelf. It was clean, no letters, no chalk scent except for a thumbprint too small to be mine and a line of dust across the top edge like a child had carried it flat and careful all the way to where the door finally opened. Some schools close and take their lessons with them. Others keep roll until someone answers present for the ones the hill forgot. If you walk Copper Creek with a camera, mind the threshold stones and listen for counting where no teacher stands. Take flowers. Take a slate. And if a child raises a hand in the picture you didn't mean to take, call the name he's trying to spell and mean it. The desert hears when you learn how.